Hey guys, welcome back to Reignited. Now today is one of those days that I am extremely excited about because we have a brand new product for the Gen 3 Hemi platform that I feel like could really change the landscape for us as enthusiasts. Let's check it out. Now what we have here is a complete standalone engine management system for your Gen 3 Hemi from Aces Fuel Injection. Now again, this is a brand new product. They just put it out, but this is designed to drop in a Gen 3 Hemi into any vehicle and make it work. So you've got the PCM, you've got the wiring harness. This one's got a couple of extra accessories we're gonna go over a little bit later. But as you can imagine, one of the direct competitors for something like this is going to be Holley with their Terminator X system. And when I was talking with Aces EFI, I told them that I already had this truck, this 1986 Chevy C10 that I swapped a 392 Hemi into. This truck is already running a Holley Terminator X system. Now, it's been working fantastic for me. As you guys saw in my most recent video, this truck ran a best of 12.4 at the racetrack. So yes, it is a very good system, but the problem is that the price has been creeping up really quickly with the Holley Terminator X system. So with these guys, they're going to be obviously a direct competitor to that system. And I told them, hey, let's do a head-to-head comparison of what the Holley Terminator X has to offer and what you guys have to offer, and we'll see who comes out on top. And they agreed and sent me out a kit. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and yard out the Holley Terminator X system out of this truck, drop this kit right back into place, and we'll see what happens. Now, of course, with all that being said, we're not gonna know how good this product is until we actually get it installed in the vehicle. So let's pop open this box, see what we've got inside. All right, let's talk real quick about what came in this kit. Now, I'm gonna go over pricing a little bit later, show you what all of this costs together, but for right now, we're just talking about the components themselves. Now, you can see it comes with a couple of sensors here. First up, we have a intake air temp sensor. This is kind of universal so that you can put it into any intake that you have. Has a little rubber grommet here so you can slip that into place. It does come with a drop-in replacement style map sensor. Now real quick, I want to make a clarification on the sensors that were provided with this kit. Now the intake air temp sensor, that's more of a universal style sensor. It has a GM style connector plug on there. And the map sensor is not in fact a direct replacement for your factory map sensor. It won't click into place in your factory intake manifold. However, this map sensor is a 2.5 bar map sensor, which means it will read up to 22 pounds of positive boost pressure. So if you have supercharged or turbocharged, you can implement this map sensor and make it work. You just won't be able to use it in a factory location. And as a nice touch, the kit already comes with the sub harness necessary that clicks into the main harness that will attach to these sensors. And also you'll notice it comes with dual wideband O2s, and that's already a significant upgrade over the Holley system because the Holley Terminator only comes with one wideband setup for it. So this way you can have one in each bank of the engine, be a lot more accurate about what's actually happening, better for tuning, all of that. And it also does come with the weld-in bungs as well, which is a nice feature so that whatever exhaust you have, you can just drill a hole, weld in the bung, put those wideband O2s in, you're good to go. Now, here is the PCM itself. Really neat, really compact unit. I like the way this thing looks a lot. It's especially way smaller than the Terminator kit, so it fits in a lot smaller areas. As a factory Dodge technician, this very much reminds me more of what a factory ECU looks like, so I kind of like that aspect to it. It has the LEDs on the front here to kind of show you status of the PCM, which is a nice feature as well, so I like this a lot. Now here we have the whole wiring harness for the Gen 3 Hemi kit. This is what makes these things special, right? Standalones have been, like standalone style ECUs have been available for a very long time, but if you're not especially proficient with wiring and setting up the ECU parameters and things like that, it's definitely too tall of a task for most people. So when you have a kit like this that comes complete as a drop-in setup, it makes it attainable for the average enthusiast, and that's why I like these kits so much. So this harness looks fantastic. All of the leads are labeled very clearly, so you can't mix them up, so there's no confusion there. We'll talk a little bit more about the wiring harness later when we get it out. But the last thing I want to show you here, I wanted to wait to open this up because this is what I'm most excited about with this kit, by far. Now this next component of the kit is something I feel like really levels up this kit as far as value per dollar. Now, most of you would know who have been in the market for this sort of a product that the Holley Terminator X Max comes factory with a 3.5-inch display screen. There's nothing really wrong with that. You can see the information you need, but it definitely doesn't look very upscale. Well, optionally available with this kit, we have a 7-inch display screen. This thing looks incredible. Now, I'm well aware that you can also option out the Holley kits with their larger screens, but it jumps the price significantly. Now I'm going to talk about price a little bit later on. You guys will see that you can easily afford your kit of the Aces system with this display screen and have a much more professional looking screen versus the Holley system. Here is the factory Terminator X Max display. Like I said, 3.5-inch display, not bad. Display is kind of the information you need to know. Here is the Aces display. So yeah, massive difference. Also, just to let you know, if you're not interested in paying a little bit more to get this 7-inch display, the stock unit does come with a 5-inch display. Now, one of the things that can be a little bit annoying about this truck is that every single time I pop the hood on this thing, there's always a couple of keyboard warriors who want to jump on there and say, that's not a 392, that's just a 5.7. You can tell by the intake manifold. And I gotta wonder about the intelligence of these people, because it's like, if I'm smart enough to do this swap in the first place, don't you think I know the difference between a 392 intake and a 5.7 intake? But you know what they say, if you're arguing with a fool, who really is the fool in the first place, right? But I can assure you, this is in fact a 392 engine. All right, first thing we're gonna do here is we're gonna go ahead and disconnect the battery. We don't want any stray electrons floating around while we're doing this, so disconnect the battery. We're gonna start taking off all of this old harness. And just like that, we've got the old Terminator system out. We've got a blank canvas here to work with. Let's go ahead and get the Aces system installed. Okay, this is the part of the kit that a lot of people get overwhelmed about. They look at this table, they see all this wiring, and they're just like, oh my gosh, I'm in over my head. I don't know where any of that stuff goes. I'm just not knowledgeable enough to do this. Guys, don't worry about it. That's what prefab kits like this are for. They make it as simple as possible, and Aces has done a great job with that. I like the way they put this together. Understand that this is a pre-terminated wiring harness, which means that it has specific ends on all the wiring. So you really can't click them into the wrong connectors or things like that. They really only go one place. So it's almost impossible to screw this thing up. And it just makes it very, very simple. Now, I like the way that Aces has done this because they have a full wiring harness right here for the ECM. That's basically the main body of the harness. But when there's differences needed, they have all these different sub-harnesses that will then connect to the main harness based on the differences of what you want. Now, right here, we have our drive-by-wire sub-harness. So what this means, my engine setup has a drive-by-wire throttle body, which means it's electronically controlled. I vastly prefer that over the old school drive-by cable type, because then I don't have to deal with throttle position sensors. I don't have to deal with idle air control motors, none of that stuff. So it's a very much more simplified setup. However, you can choose that old school style if you want, and it just comes with a slightly different harness that clicks into the main one. You're good to go with no wiring changes on your behalf. Right here, we have our coil pack sub-harnesses. We have our injector sub-harnesses. We have the knock sensor sub-harness. We have our coil igniter sub-harnesses. We have the cam and crank sub-harness. And right here, we have a couple of other sensors. I think it's intake, air temp, and map sensor sub-harness. So very simple again, and all of these just go in a specific spot. Now, there is a little bit of wiring involved, but I'm going to show you just how simple it is to install one of these things. When you're looking at the main wiring harness, there's literally 4 wires that need to be connected. You have a power, a ground, a switch 12-volt power, and your fuel pump. That's it for the main harness. It could not be more simple than that. We're going to talk about this a little bit more as we install it. Now, it also has a few more outputs here that are all really helpful for your application, whatever that may be. Really not that many wires here with this system. So like I said, guys, if electrical is not your strong suit, don't worry about it. They've really laid out this system really well. You'll see it goes together just like Legos. Not a big deal at all. So we've got the main portion of the harness fed through the firewall into the engine bay, but there are a couple of things that get connected to the harness underneath the dash area, and one of those is going to be our drive-by-wire sub-harness here. You can see it's a very simple harness. There's only 3 connections. This connection here gets plugged into the harness, and you have these 2 clearly labeled connectors, one for PPS, which is pedal position sensor, and one for ETC, which is electronic throttle control. So this one gets plugged into the pedal, this one gets fed through the firewall and connected to the throttle body, and this one plugs into the main harness underneath the dash. It's just that simple. Now with these kinds of systems, I find it helpful to actually start splitting apart the wires themselves so that I know where they're going to be routed. That helps me get a better idea of where I want them to be located at, and just helps to separate them in my mind. So again, they're all very clearly labeled here. You got this one is going to be for your injector sub harness. This one's for the ignition coils. You got a couple for the coil drivers themselves. And then you are going to have some connectors that you're not going to use at all. Like for instance, this transmission connector. This system is not set up to run any sort of a Hemi-based automatic transmission, so you won't be using that plug, and that's not unusual. The Terminator system itself also has several plugs that you don't end up using at all, so not strange. So I have another tip for you when it comes to installing these types of systems. There's a really strong desire to start zip tying the harness to absolutely everything as soon as you pull it through the firewall there, but I recommend doing it the other way around. Go ahead and install all of your connections and then start zip tying the harness from the sensors back towards the firewall. The reason for that is because with these universal type systems, they don't know exactly where all of your components are, so the harness has some extra length built into it. So if you start zip tying things from the harness or from the firewall forward, you're going to end up with a lot of loose wires and it looks kind of messy. But if you start zip tying from the sensors towards the firewall itself, you can minimize a lot of that sloppiness and make it look a lot cleaner. Now, it's not going to be as perfect as if you'd built the harness yourself from scratch, but the reality is most of us don't have that kind of capability. So I still think these are a much better system. So for right now, I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of those sub harnesses installed, get them clicked into their respective sensors, and zip tie this harness up out of the way. Make it decent looking. I'm not going to make it perfect at this time, just enough to get it up out of the way so we can fire the engine. And then we can focus in on the few wires that we actually have to connect. Now, when it comes to installing our injector wires and our coil wires, they are actually labeled which cylinder is which, but just in case you're wondering, on the Hemi engine, it goes 1, 3, 5, 7, and 2, 4, 6, and 8. And another way you can figure this out is to know which cylinder is number 1. It's basically, if you're standing in front of the engine here, whichever one is closest to you, that's going to be the number 1 cylinder. In this case, it's on the driver's side right here. Now, one quick tip I have for you when you're actually zip tying the harness in place is make sure you're leaving some appropriate slack in all of the lines before you tie this harness down, because you don't want to have the lines pulled so tightly that potentially it's pulling the wires out the back of the connector. So just a quick tip, leave a little bit of slack there, just enough so you got some good movement with the harness itself. All right, we've got both of our wideband O2 sensors installed here. As you can see, I'm actually using Hellcat catalysts here, so I already had the O2 sensor locations. I did have to clearance the floor a little bit right there for this one to have some good room there, because I wasn't using that side before. Again, the Terminator only had one wideband, which I had on this side. So now we have one for each bank. It's going to be reading a lot better. And as always, make sure when you're zip tying your wiring here, make sure it's away from any of those heat sources. You don't want to have your wiring caught or trapped or melted by any of these exhaust components. So let's get that all tied up and we'll be done underneath. One quick tip for you guys regarding the wideband O2 sensors. You'll notice that on both of mine, they're right up at the very top of the exhaust. One thing you don't want to do with any sort of oxygen sensor is mount it in the bottom of the exhaust or even angled down at all. Basically, that O2 sensor will collect moisture and it will very quickly kill the sensor, and these things are kind of expensive. So if you're going to put these in, at least have them be halfway up the exhaust, if not a little bit higher, and definitely angled down as best you can. That way they will not collect that moisture. Now, what we have here are the coil driver units for each bank of the engine. Now, these things have some screw holes, so you can make a plate and mount them much cleaner. Right now, I'm just tucking them back out of the way, but I did want to make a note that each of them has a ground that needs to be attached. Now, the cylinder heads themselves have a couple of bosses on the back side, so we're just going to screw those directly to that. Should be good to go. Now let's talk about the 4 wires we need to connect for the main harness. Yes, only 4. This is such a simple setup. Now you have power and ground, and it is critical that your power and ground wires go directly to the battery. Do not try to tap into any other source that has 12-volt power. It seems like most of the issues people have with these standalone systems are because they've done something like that. It kind of wigs them out. They don't like it. Run your power and ground wires directly to the battery. You'll save yourself a huge headache. Now, along with that, there is a 12-volt switched wire that we need to attach. Now, it's also critical with this one to whatever wire you decide to use for that basically it has 12 volts with the key on, you need to check and make sure that it also has 12-volt power during cranking, because if it doesn't, this thing's never gonna fire and you're gonna pull your hair out and be like, why isn't this thing working? And it's because it'll kill power during cranking. There's a lot of circuits in your car that will actually do that because it doesn't want to draw extra power while it's trying to run the starter. So critical to check that whatever circuit you decide to tap into, make sure it has power while cranking. If you do, you'll be in good shape. Now our last wire we need to hook up here is the orange one, and that's our fuel pump wire. Now this wire is already ran through a relay that is integral to the main wiring harness here, and it's of a decent gauge wiring. It can run up to a 15 amp circuit. So most vehicles, you can just hook this directly up to your fuel pump circuit. Now if you have a big dog fuel pump, something that really draws a lot of amps, you'll need to run this wire through an additional relay and run heavier gauge wiring to your fuel pump. But for most setups, including this truck right here, this is fine. I can hook this directly up to my fuel pump circuit. But it's as simple as that. We'll hook up these 4 wires, then we'll focus on a couple of the accessory wires we have to hook up underneath the hood. All right, I want to give you a little bit more information about the inputs and outputs harness. That's this harness here that had these 12 freestanding wires that you can wire into a variety of different things. Now, let's go over real quick what each of these components are. Now, you have 2 of the wires here are for fan controls, fan 1 and fan 2. We have 2 of them for vehicle speed sensor. That's if you're running a factory speed sensor off the transmission, you can convert that signal into a speedometer or something of that nature. We have the burnout wire, which is essentially a rev limiter for when you're performing a burnout. We have the brake switch, which you can use in conjunction with turning off the overdrive in a transmission, something like that, to where the lockup converter disengages when you step on the brake. We have your power wire for the alternator. So if you have a 1-wire alternator, you can rig that up using that. Tachometer out. So basically, if you're running an old school analog style tachometer, this will actually read that signal. Next is the AC wire. What this means is that anytime you actually engage the air conditioning, obviously it drags the engine down a little bit. There's a lot more load on the engine. So if you're at your normal idle speed, it has the potential to drag it down far enough to where it could actually stumble and die. So if you got this wired up and configured in the ECU, as soon as you turn on the AC, when it goes down to idle, it'll automatically kick that idle speed up a little bit and keep that from stalling. So pretty neat feature there. The larger red wire is essentially a 12-volt positive for when the key is on that you can use for whatever function you want to use. Then we have a 2-step wire. Who doesn't love a good 2-step? And we have launch control wire as well. So some really neat features that are configurable in this ECU. Now for us right now, I'm not going crazy. Essentially all I'm using is the fan 1 and 2 here. So very simple wiring. Let's go ahead and get these things all wired up. Real quick here, I want you guys to look at the actual gauge of these wires here. These are very, very thin wires. So you're not actually going to be powering anything with these wires. These are what's called trigger wires, and I'll explain what that means. So this ECU is very much like most modern ECUs in that how it is activating these components is by providing what's called a ground side trigger. So most of these components, because they're drawing a lot of amperage, they're going to be running through a relay. So you have much heavier gauge wiring that's running through the relay. But what it's missing is that ground side circuit. That is what's going to the PCM. And all that is the PCM, when it says, hey, I want to turn on this component, it closes the driver and provides a ground circuit to the relay. Now, as soon as that ground is provided to the relay closes, and then full power is allowed to run through that relay to the major component. So it's literally just a switching device within the PCM that tells the relay to turn on. And that's it. With a grand total of 6 wires wired in, we have the entire Aces EFI system in there. Now you can see it's not the cleanest installation. It basically looks exactly like how it did with the Terminator setup in there. But again, I wasn't going for ultra cleanliness here. If you want to spend as much time as you want to make this as clean looking as possible, you can make it look pretty darn good. But for me, for right now, we're ready to fire this thing up. All right, we got the battery reconnected and there's no smoke, so that's a fantastic start. Now the Aces system is similar to the Terminator in that there is a setup wizard. So as soon as we turn the key on, this should have power, and we'll run through a quick couple of questions here to set this up to let it know what exactly it's powering, and then it should just fire right up. Now, another great thing is that the Aces system does have the self-learning functionality, same as the Terminator does. So when you're driving this thing around, you basically have it load up a base map, and as you're driving it around, it will learn better and better and better as you're driving along. I think these are awesome systems. They work really well. Now, they are designed for more of a mild setup, something with like a cam or something like that. If you're doing supercharged or turbocharged, you're probably going to need professional tuning at that point. But the self-learning functionality it works really good in my opinion. All right, you guys, quick update here. I did have to change a couple of things around with the sensors here, and the reason for that is because when you're dealing with sensors like air intake temp or coolant temp, those are resistance-based sensors, and different brands use different resistance values in those sensors. So if it's expecting one thing in the PCM and then the sensor is giving it a different value, then your readings are going to be off, and that's what was happening on the dash. My readings for the air intake temp and coolant temp were not accurate, so I wanted to switch back to the air intake temp sensor that was actually provided with the kit, and this necessitated a couple other small changes. Now, the resistance values of these sensors are what's known as the scaling of the sensor. If you're competent with this sort of thing, you can actually go into the PCM here and change those scaling values to where it'll actually read the factory sensors no problem. But that requires you to know what the actual resistance values are for these sensors, and I don't have those available to me, so I wasn't able to find them when I was looking around. So for the short term, I'm just going to switch it over to the GM style and make it easy for myself. Now, it's important to note here that with the coolant temp sensor, that is a sensor that is not provided with this kit, so you're going to have to source your own. I'll go ahead and put it up on the screen right now, which one I chose. But again, it's just the GM style that will screw into the same location as your factory coolant temp sensor. Now, it should read the air intake temp sensor properly because that's the sensor that came with the kit. However, I did have to make one other change to the wiring harness. I had to switch sub harnesses, which one I was using, because this sub harness that I had plugged in has the actual factory plug for the air intake temp sensor, but it also has the factory plug for the factory map sensor. Now, I'm not going to be using the factory air intake temp sensor anymore. I have to use the other sub harness that has the correct connector for the GM style, but the other sub harness comes with the connector for the 2.5 bar map sensor that was provided. So I'll no longer be using this one. So I went ahead and plugged in the other sub harness, and I went ahead and installed the 2.5 bar map sensor. Now, important thing to note here is that that map sensor does not plug into the stock location on the intake manifold of your engine. It's just not built that way. It's a different style. So you have to find another source location for that reference to the map sensor. Really not a big deal. You can take it from a variety of different sources. However, I'll show you right now, I actually took it from the purge solenoid port on your intake manifold. Now, I can pretty much guess that if you're doing a Hemi swap, you're not going to be using the purge solenoid anymore, so you're going to have to block off that port anyway, so why not use it as a map reference source? So I think it's a good solution. I think it looks pretty decent, and if everything works out okay, let's fire this thing up. All right, let's go ahead and turn this thing on and run it through the wizard process. The screen is massive. All right, it's the jackpot system here. Hit the little icons up here in the top right, go to wizard, start the wizard. All right, automatically it says, yes, this is a Hemi, right? Say yes. And it only gives you two options here. These are GM options, 24 tooth and 58 tooth. The Hemi runs the same as the later LS, that 58 tooth. So select that one. And then it asks you what kind of cam is in this thing. I have a fairly mild cam in here. And then it asks you what map type. Because I am using the provided 2.5 bar, that is the AE 1041, so I'm going to select that one. Dual widebands, yes. Drive-by-wire, yes. Throttle pedal type, they don't actually list a Chrysler one at all, so you just have to choose custom right here. And electronic throttle body type, same deal. They don't list the Chrysler version, so you just have to go down to custom. Transmission control, no. Number of injectors, kind of hard to see on the screen there, but it does say 8. And then it wants you to input what the actual injector size is. In this case, I'm running 5.7 injectors. They're plenty enough for what this truck does. Those are 36 pound-per-hour injectors. Your overall engine displacement is the 392. And your firing order, which it automatically loads the Hemi firing order. So then it says, what do you want your hot idle speed to be? I'm going to bump this up to 900. So, update that. There we go. Hit next. All right, and then it basically just gives you an overview of everything you've chosen to this point. Hit save. Yes, I want to save it. Then it says turn the key off for 5 seconds to make that configuration effective. Okay. Key off. Key on. You hear that fuel pump prime? That's always a good sign. All right, so now when we're looking at our sensors here, the map sensor is reading 12.5 PSI. That is accurate for me because I'm at a little bit of elevation. I'm at 4,250 feet, so it doesn't read full atmospheric pressure here, so that's right. Battery voltage is good. Engine coolant temp says 57, that's correct. The manifold absolute temp or intake air temp is at 46, that's correct. So all of our sensors are now reading correctly. I think it's time to try to fire this thing up. Oh yeah. All right guys, one thing I do want to mention is that, again, this is a fully programmable standalone. So if you just want to hook it up and let it run just as it is, that's totally fine, but you can change values, and I encourage you to get educated about it and change things until it perfectly fits your application and runs exactly how you want it to run. So just to show you real quick, you can go in and you can change things like your idle settings, things like that. Now, one thing I did find out with this kit is that when you click on things, you're like, oh, that's not actually letting me change anything. But what you have to do is you have to double click on it. And when you do, it'll take you to the screen where you can change it. So just remember that you have to double click on these things. But again, you've got all sorts of different things that you can change, you know, your sensor scaling values, things like that. It's not quite as intuitive as the Holley system is, but it's definitely something that I encourage you, again, do your research and figure some things out and try some different settings just so you can see. It really does make a big difference to fine tune it to your specific setup. And you guys, that is sick. Literally just basically an afternoon's work to remove the old system and put this new system in. You guys saw only 6 wires are required to actually be wired in. Everything else is totally plug and play with this kit. Really enjoying that new 7-inch display, has all the information really clearly labeled there. And as an extra feature that comes with this kit that I also think puts it a step above the rest, it comes with a GPS speedometer built into it. You just have to wire in the antenna And basically you'll have a speedometer, which is amazing because I've never actually had a speedo in this truck before. I was gonna try to make the original speed sensor work on this GM transmission, but I was gonna have to convert the signal. It was just gonna be a huge pain. I eventually decided not to do it. With this kit, you can just wire it in and automatically you've got a speedometer. So super excited about that. Can't wait to take this thing for a spin, but there is one holdup with that. Yeah, as you can see, winter has officially begun here at my house, so we're gonna have to wait for the snow to melt off before we can take this thing for a spin. All right, let's talk about advantages and features here. What advantages does the Holley system have over the Aces EFI system? Well, for one, the Holley system is available for the 03 to 08 Hemis. The Aces system is only for the 2009 and up engines. Now, I don't really consider that too much of a disadvantage because, to be perfectly honest, you guys know me, you know I have a lot of experience working on these engines. I don't even build the 03 to 08 engines anymore because the power potential of the 09 and up is so much higher right off the bat that that's the only models I'll build. I think the 03 to 08 are great engines. They're very reliable engines, very simple. That's why I like them. But if you're trying to make actual power out of them, I would absolutely start with an 09 and up. So again, not a huge disadvantage there. Okay, another advantage that the Holley system has over the Aces is that they have VVT control, which is variable valve timing, and also SRV control. That's a short runner valve. Now you do have to pay extra to get these features because you need an extra wiring harness to come with it, but it is capable of controlling these. Now why that's important is because, especially with the SRV system, the short runner valve, if you don't know what that is, in the intake manifold on the 5.7 trucks and the 6.4 cars and trucks, there's an actuator on the intake manifold that controls some flapper valves in there. It basically can flip it back and forth between short runner and long runner. Now, this really makes a big difference, more than you might think, and it really adds to your area under the curve as far as power goes. So I really think it's a great feature to have. Now, regarding the VVT or variable valve timing, that's really not that big of a deal because primarily, anytime you're upgrading to a decent sized camshaft, it's gonna have you lock out the VVT system anyway. So not that big of a deal. And Aces has told me that they are already working on having that SRV functionality available for the next generation of this product. Now, another advantage I would give to Holley here is just pure size. Obviously, the company has been around for a very long time. It's a massive company, and they have actually distributed a lot of their products already. So there's a lot of good experience out there already. This being a new product, there's not as much experience. It's a smaller company. They're really working hard, but they're just not capable of the pure manpower that Holley has. So there could potentially be some struggles there. Maybe their tech line isn't as quick to get back to you as Holley's or something like that. Still, it's something that they're really working hard at because they want to compete at this level. All right, now let's talk about the Aces EFI and where I think they're already a step above the Holley in terms of what you're getting value per dollar. Now, on the Terminator system, it does come with a map sensor that's integral to the PCM, but it's only a 1-bar map sensor. This kit automatically comes with a 2.5-bar map sensor, so you're already a step ahead of the game right there. Now, secondly, I mentioned that this does have the GPS speedometer that comes factory with this, so you have a speedo right off the bat, which I think is a massive upgrade. You're already getting a larger screen factory with this, 5-inch, than you would with the Terminator system, but if you opt for the extra 7-inch screen, I really do think it's worth the money. Also, as mentioned before, this does come with dual wideband O2 sensors, so you're reading off of each bank, which is the correct way to do it if you actually want to tune your engine properly, rather than just the one wideband O2 that the Holley system has. Now, the final advantage in my mind that the Aces EFI system has over the Holley Terminator is in price. And let me tell you guys, you are going to be blown away by what the value per dollar is of this kit. It is crazy. I do want to mention here when I'm talking about pricing that these numbers are accurate as of November 2024. Obviously, anything can happen in the future, but these are the current prices. Now, I do want to encourage you guys to go to the Aces EFI website because there's so many different variants of this kit that you can order. Some come with fuel systems. You can get it with an upgraded intake manifold. There's a lot of different options out there, but you can keep it base simple as well. The simplest version of this kit that does still come with that 5-inch display, it does come with drive-by cable throttle body rather than drive-by wire. You can get that for $999. So $1,000 for the base kit, and you'll be able to drive a Gen 3 Hemi in basically any vehicle. You really cannot beat that price. Now, my kit came in a little bit more than that because, of course, like I said, I did want the drive-by-wire setup, and I did get the 7-inch display. Now, that 7-inch display screen is currently selling for $450 as an option. So my kit, all in, as it was delivered to me, was $1,720, which I think is an amazing deal. So as a direct comparison with the Holley Terminator X Max, that drive-by-wire system for the 2013 and up Gen 3 Hemi, it's going to cost you $2,171. But if you want to compete similarly with the Aces kit and upgrade to their 7-inch display screen, that's going to cost you an additional $1,298. This means that if you're buying a Terminator X Max system that's comparably equipped to the Aces EFI system that I have right here, it's going to cost you $3,501. So the difference between this kit and the Terminator X Max, this is literally half the price. And it does all of the same stuff and has some upgraded components over the Terminator system. Guys, I don't see how you can go wrong with this system, to be honest. Go check it out. All right, guys, that's it for this episode. I wish I had an opportunity to drive this thing, but we're gonna have to wait a little while for that snow to melt before we can do that. I wanna say a special thank you to Aces EFI for sending out that kit so I can try it out. You saw how simple of an install that actually was. I highly encourage you guys, if you're at all thinking about doing a Gen 3 Hemi swap into whatever vehicle of your choice, go check them out, Aces EFI. I'll put the link up here and also down below. I guarantee you there's going to be a system that fits exactly what you're trying to do and that fits your budget as well. But I want to thank you guys for watching as always. We'll see you next time on Reignited.